Have you been interested in helping your family immigrate? If so, then I want to tell you a lot about that process today. And we're going to talk about the family petition. What kind of evidence do you need? What kind of proof do you need so that immigration will be like, okay, we can go ahead and move on forward to the residency portion, which is applying for the green card to help them actually live here permanently. We're going to talk about the evidence, but we're also going to talk about the other issues of if you want to do a family petition, then what are some of the things that you want to include, and also what can you expect? And when we're looking at what to expect, we're looking at things like what were the immigration violations? Do they have any immigration violations? Have they been in the United States before? And even if they haven't, what have they been doing outside of the United States as well? The next thing is that there's different categories within immigration law. So there are what we call immediate relative categories, which are generally faster, and then there's preference categories, which are generally slower, but not all of them process at the same time, and different countries process at different times. So, but what's the difference? Well, you need to know that, but if you watch the video, we're going to be able to explain that to you today. The next thing is that the fees are going up really soon. Today is, I think it's February. What is today? It's February 12th. April 1st, those fees are going to be going up. How much? Well, it depends on if you do a paper filing or an electronic filing. We're going to talk about that in a little bit too. And then the next thing is if you've been married less than 2 years, or what kind of permanent resident card are you hopefully going to be able to get? And if you're going through a marriage-based situation. So this is what I've been practicing for almost 17 years. It'll be 17 years in April. 99.99% immigration over the almost 17 years. So I'm going to give you what I know. I think it'll help you whether you're thinking about just starting the process or if you're in the middle of it. You're going to find some tips that are going to be helpful to understanding this process a lot better. So, family petition. The first thing that we're going to be talking about is the proof. What kind of proof do you have? Well, we got different kinds of family categories. So let's talk about that for a minute. So the very first one is a marriage-based situation. So if you are wanting to file for your spouse, you can do that if you're a U.S. citizen or a green card holder. This is going to be only focused on those types of marriage relationships. We got other things where you might be able to be in a victim visa and you can file for your spouse. We've also got asylum type situations where you can file for your spouse. But we're not talking about that today. Today, we're only going to talk about if you're a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. The other categories are you've got preference categories such as a sibling being filed for or a parent-child relationship. We're going to talk about those, and if you're ready, then I'm going to go ahead and dive into that right now. So we're going to jump into the categories first. So on categories, what you're going to know is that there is the immediate relative category. Okay, don't think of immediate relative as being the thing that you're like, oh, I'm related to them or we're married to them, that they're automatically, that's my kid, that you're immediate relative. You're not. You got to consider something else too. So you got immediate relatives, understand that. Then you also have preference categories. Okay, what are those? I'm going to explain them here. Okay, so immediate relatives, number one, you got to be a U.S. citizen. The petitioner, the person asking for that person to come to the United States and be lawfully here, is the petitioner. The petitioner has to be a U.S. citizen, number one. Okay, but not all U.S. citizen petitioners get to be immediate relative. There's only three types. Okay, three types of immediate relatives. The first one is a U.S. citizen spouse. Okay, the next one is a U.S. citizen child, which is actually now 21, that's filing for their parent. So it's a son or daughter once they turn 21, not a child anymore. Okay. And the third one is a U.S. citizen parent filing for their minor child. Big thing is they're under 21 and not married. Okay. So immediate relative. That's the three categories for immediate relatives. Why does it matter if you're in a immediate relative or a preference category? The reason why is because immediate relatives have no cap on how many people can immigrate to the United States. So let's say that the immediate relative you're looking at, I'm going to scoot this video up. It got me distracted a little bit here. we're going to get a lot closer. So in the immediate relative category, what you've got is there are no limits on how many people can process every year. So there's no quota. Like, say, if you're a U.S. citizen, like, say, we have 5,000 U.S. citizens that filed for 5,000 foreign spouses. There is no limit on how many of those can process every year. However, if it's a permanent resident, a green card holder filing for their spouse, there is a limit on how many people can process through that category every year. Okay, so kind of keep that in mind. And because there's a limit, and because so many people apply every year, that means there's a line, and you got to wait till you get to the front of that line until you can file for permanent residency. Okay, so we've got immediate relatives, we got preference categories. If you can be an immediate relative, it's got a lot of benefits, but biggest one, usually best benefit, is the fact that there is no wait time. As far as once they've decided, USCIS has decided the uh, relationship exists and that you're a U.S. citizen, you can move on to residency, to the next application. Still got to see if residency is a good option for you, so you should check before you even file the family petition to see if that's something you should do. Okay, so we've talked about the three immediate relative categories. We've got the U.S. citizen spouse, we've got the U.S. citizen son or daughter who's 21 and filing for their parent, and then we also have the U.S. citizen parent filing for their minor child who's unmarried. Immediate relatives. Preference categories. Okay, so preference categories, what are they? Okay, we got 4 preference categories, and the second preference is got a split in it. They've got an F2A and F2B. So F stands for family. Okay, if you look at something called the Visa Bulletin, we'll probably include a link to say that, so you can understand this a little bit better even, but the first one is going to be F1, okay? Then there's F2, and there's an F2A and F2B, okay? Then we have F3, and then we have F4. Well, what do those mean, Mike? So I'm going to tell you, okay? F1 is a U.S. citizen parent filing for their adult son or daughter who is not married, okay? U.S. citizen parent filing for their son or daughter, meaning they're over 21, but they're not married. That's one certain category. Okay, F2 category. We have F2A and we have F2B. Okay, F2A is spouses of permanent residents, and then the F2B and F2A has got two different types of family members. F2A, spouses of permanent residents and their minor children of permanent residents. Okay, all right, that's F2A. F2B, adult sons and daughters of permanent residents. If they get married, they don't have a category. So they're unmarried sons and daughters of permanent residents. Okay, that's why if you hear people say, "Well, I got married and it got canceled," it's because they're in F2A, went to F2B. Advantage of the petitioner becoming a U.S. citizen, you can move on to F3, which is the married sons and daughters of U.S. citizens. That's the third preference category. Okay. Fourth preference category, brothers and sisters of U.S. citizens. Okay. So we've got immediate relatives, and we've got the 4 preference categories, with knowing the second preference category has got 2 subcategories. Think of the second preference as permanent residents only. Really, that's the only preference category that's allowed for permanent residents. All right. So different categories. All right. So why does that matter? Again, last time, U.S. citizen, immediate relative categories. Once USCIS is going to have to decide family petition of the immediate relative or the permanent resident, and decide who is the person, what's the relationship, and is that petitioner got the legal status. That's the same no matter what. They have to decide that before they can decide if they're going to apply for residency or if they can move on to residency. So you got to prove that first. But with that, then they're going to look at what category are we going through. And immediate relatives, once they decide the family route relationship, if the family petition's approval, then they'll be looking at residency. And we're talking about 12 months, 14, 18 months, generally in that. Sometimes it's even quicker than it. We'll see them even at 6 months sometimes. But in the preference category, there's a lower priority in processing those cases, and also there's a longer wait time. Okay, and so you're going to look at things called the visa bulletin that will say, well, when can I apply? Then you're going to look at the visa bulletin and say, oh, I can look at that visa bulletin and say, I get it. All right. So what kind of proof are we looking at? So, well, whether you're in the preference category or we're looking at the immediate relative category, the proof is going to be the same. All right. But it depends on the relationship. So if you look at USCIS, United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, what they're going to tell you is that the instructions are going to say this is the kind of proof that we want. Okay. So if it's a spouse-based case, so whether it's a U.S. citizen spouse filing for their spouse or a permanent resident, they want to see the marriage certificate. Marriage certificate's got to be in there, okay? And if there's a marriage certificate, there's got to be marriage proof. So they want to make sure that you're just not married on paper, but you actually are residing together and doing things together that married couples do. Well, what kind of stuff is that? Well, what you're going to be looking at is sharing money. They call it bona fide marriage proof. You're going to be sharing money. You have kids together. You're residing together. So you might have bills together. And everyone looks different for me. In my cases, I've got not a single one that looks the same. But what we do is we group together certain types of proof and say, go for 5 out of 10 of these types of proof. So what kinds are they? Well, let's look at, first of all, you've got to, no matter what, got to have that marriage certificate. Okay, then after that, what's the next thing? First thing I look for is, have you had kids together in a marriage-based case? Do you have any kids together? All right. If so, that's great. Hopefully both of your names are on the birth certificates. But it's not the end of the world if it's not. But then the third thing is do you have bills with both of your names on it? Okay, if not, then there's other things. But another great thing is, do you have shared finances? They want to make sure that you're sharing money. Fake couples don't share money. Real couples hopefully do. So that's the one thing that we're going to be looking at there. But if you're sharing money, what kind of stuff should you include? Really, your bank statements. We like 6 months. Some people share money before they even get married, and that's another way you could do that as well. So, but what about other things? What are some of the other things that you can include? Well, you could do photos together. That's good. Those can be fake sometimes. So immigration doesn't necessarily want to just go only on photos. But if you got a marriage ceremony, then take pictures of it. Include that. That's always good. If you had a lot of people show up to your wedding, include that as well. Okay. Very, very, very important that it will stop you in your tracks if you don't include is, if either of you have been married before, you need to include the divorce decree from the previous marriage. If your previous spouse died, you need to include the death certificate for that. If it was annulled, meaning it was originally held as valid, but then they canceled it for some other reason, legal reason, then you need to include that as well. USCIS doesn't always say that you need to include the previous marriage certificate and the divorce decree, but I like to include both of them because I feel like sometimes they ask for that. So just include both of it. What do? You just include you go to the court that you got married at, where it was registered, the civil registry, and then you get the divorce decree or the death certificate. A lot of times it's just kind of a blend of both. And both, sometimes if it's a later in life marriage, we'll have couples with multiple marriages, and you got to include every single one of them. Okay. If you're looking at the situation where you're wanting to file for a sibling, that means a brother or sister, you want to make sure it included. The proof is a lot less. The main thing you need to show is you got a common parent. Okay, brothers and sisters. You can file for step siblings. Okay, one different parent, but you gotta have at least one common parent. Okay, now what's that mean? Or if it was an adoption back in the day, you can file for that, but you need to talk to somebody because there's an immigration attorney, because there's some special rules on some of those things, especially on the dates the adoptions took place, because the laws changed on that. But if you're filing for a sibling, you want to make sure that you've got uh, the common parent. So you're going to have 2 birth certificates with both mom and dad's name on it. Okay. And then the next thing is that petitioning sibling needs to show that they're a U.S. citizen. That's the only category where a sibling can be filed for, is the petitioner has to be a U.S. citizen. What kind of proof do we like to use that they're U.S. citizens? We like to use birth certificates, and we like to use U.S. passports. The Board of Immigration Appeals has said that a U.S. passport is proof. Same thing as a birth certificate. Should include both, though. Okay. All right. What about for a parent filing for a child? They say that there's some special things that you need to consider on that, but one of them is when did the parents marry the other parent that had the kids together? So if they didn't, then you need to provide proof that that relationship existed. There's a long list of things that you can use. Actually, it's a shorter list, but with some long lists of examples that you could use. So the family relationships can vary quite a bit, but even in those situations, but the proof needs to be solid. You want to when you file, you want to make sure that you're giving them your best evidence that you could possibly have. Okay. All right. Next thing is, let's say that you've got your proof. Let's say that you've got your the relationship exists. You know it does. You've got your proof together, and you say, Michael, we want to file and start getting the residency. I'm like, okay, that's great. Let's look at your proof, but let's also talk to the beneficiary, and let's talk about what they have been doing with their life. And so the one of those things is, have they been to the United States? If they haven't, what have they been doing outside of the United States? And specifically, what we look at is what we call inadmissibility violations. I'm going to do a video on that here in another month or two when it gets to be the topic of inadmissibilities and waivers, which is a big topic as well. But on inadmissibilities, there's, depending on how you want to separate the sentences and the section them all out, there's roughly 50 different immigration violations somebody could possibly have, and so you need to be considering that as well. But the first thing is that people want to say, well, I want to file here, I want them to be here. Can we do that? And we'll say, well, first thing we've got to look at is, if they are here, how did they come into the United States? And understand that the general rule is that if they came into the United States without permission, the normal rule is they're going to have to leave the United States to go finish the process at the U.S. consulate that is closest to them. So that's a really common situation we have. And so then if they say, well, what's that look like? Well, then what we call that is consulate processing. And if they've been in the United States for too long, how long is too long? 6 months, over 6 months starts to, and if they're over 18, starts to trigger something called unlawful presence. We want to make sure that we're aware of, if they have unlawful presence, what does that look like? And if they've had things like DACA or a visa before, let's look at if there are any gaps in the DACA situation. If there's a visa, when did the visa expire, or when did they violate their status on the visa, such as working without permission? Those all things matter a whole lot. Okay, so all right, now people want to file here, and people don't want to leave the United States, so they don't trigger unlawful presence. And the other reason is so they don't have to be separated from each other. But the other part you got to consider that too is that if they're wanting to file for, um, we have a lot of people that are going through the preference categories. A lot of time in the F2A category, where we've got a situation where um, the kids are wanting to file, or the spouse wanting to file here, but they're only in a preference category, and the spouse is only or the parent is just a permanent resident, but they came in legally. We've seen a lot of Canadian citizens in that situation. They lawfully entered, but they overstayed. Well, and that permanent resident spouse is wanting to file for them. Great, that's great, but you got to consider that if they are an overstay, and this is the big thing that really matters, and that's what we're talking about right now, is that if they want to file here, and if they've overstayed their visa, let's say that they came in legally, but if they've overstayed it, and if they're in a preference category, not an immediate relative category, they're going to have to leave to finish the process outside of the United States. We got some bad people that are notaries out there, people that are not lawyers, and sometimes lawyers miss it as well too. But the people that are not lawyers usually do it a lot. They'll file the green card application here, and they aren't eligible to do the green card application here. So it's a mess. And then they come and talk to me. So don't fall into that trap. Talk to an immigration lawyer that's really experienced. You won't have that mess. They'll be able to tell you in advance where you're going to wind up filing for your green card. All right. So next is categories, such as in the immediate relative category. There is one downside to being in an immediate relative category. There are no derivatives. That means, like, say, let's say a U.S. citizen is married to his foreign spouse, and they have 3 kids together. Okay, so we got the U.S. citizen spouse filing for his spouse, foreign-born spouse, and they've got 3 kids together. So that's like 4 family members. We're talking about immediate relative. Let's say these 3 kids are minors and unmarried. Okay, what's going to happen is, because they're immediate relatives, there are no derivatives in immediate relative category. That citizen spouse is going to have to file 4 separate family petitions. That's really the only downside to being a immediate relative in my mind. All right, what if this person's a permanent resident? Well, okay, the F2A category, filing for their spouse and their 3 minor children that are unmarried. In that situation, most of the time, unless these kids are getting older, and we won't talk about that one today because that's another talk about Child Status Protection Act, that's in depth. But you can file for that spouse, and they can have derivatives, meaning as long as they stay under 21 and unmarried, you can group them all together in one petition. So it's not a bad idea. Or in the F4 category, you could also do that as well. The sibling filing for the other sibling, and maybe they have a spouse and 2 kids. You can file for that sibling, and there can be derivatives, and these kids can be a part of that as long as they're unmarried and under 21 as well. Okay, so derivatives are part of the immigration process, but you got to understand when they age out. That's really important. 21 and unmarried, so those kids shouldn't marry until the process is over, unless they want to start some other new process in life. So, all right, fees are going up soon. The fees are going up. Currently, every single family petition costs $535, but the fees are going up depending on if you do an electronic filing or if you do a paper filing. Okay, so electronic filings are going to go up to $625, and the paper filing is going up $675. So that's $140 more if you're wanting to do the paper filing, and you're doing it. When does the fees go up? April 1st, 2024. So keep that in mind. All right. Covering a lot of this good stuff here. Let's talk about the next thing being, if you are married less than 2 years, let's just say, yeah, let's go with that first. If you're married less than 2 years and you get filed for by a U.S. citizen spouse, you need to understand that they will only give you, because that relationship's so fresh, Congress, the lawmakers, decided to make it a little more protective of making sure that people aren't just getting married for papers, and they're going to make sure that after, they're only going to give them a 2-year green card. After that 2 years is up, they've got to apply for another status. In fact, they give you a little bit of time early, 90 days before the 2-year card expires, and they're going to file, you got to file something else called a removal of conditions. Okay, removal of conditions is verifying that that relationship is still valid. Okay, some situations will come up where that maybe the petitioner passed away, maybe there was a divorce, maybe there was abuse, In those situations, you can file a waiver for that, but you still need to file the removal of conditions. You don't file the renewal of the green card. That's a big mistake that we see a lot of people make, and then they come into me and say, can we fix it? Sometimes we can, as long as the immigration court's not involved in their life yet next. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of different things over these roughly 25 minutes, but we talked about the family petition. We talked about the type of proof that you need to use. We talked about checking if you're going to, you've got that family relationship established, that that can exist. And what's the next step look like when you're talking about the permanent residency? Can they file here? Are they going to have to go outside of the United States? What are the other immigration violations? We're going to talk about that, I think, in March. Do a long video about that. But then if you are going through the family petition, what's your wait time? Well, you've got USCIS processing times, but also you need to consider what if you're an immediate relative or if you're going through the preference category. Okay. Finally, you got the fees that are going up here in about a month and a half. So you need to think about really seriously. You can save yourself hundreds of dollars if you hurry up and do that. But don't rush it if you don't know what the process looks like. The end of the road process you need to look at too. And even if somebody's got immigration violations, you need to consider, can we fix them? A lot of violations we can fix. There's some we can't though. Okay. Not everybody can file a waiver. All right. You need to understand that. We do a lot of waivers though. And finally, understand what you're getting when you're done with it. If you've been married less than 2 years and you're filing for it, you're only going to get a 2-year card if you're going through the immediate relative category. All right, guys, that's a big group of stuff. We really do a whole lot of immigration family-based stuff in our office, and we can talk to you about it. We've got a lot of experience. Gosh, we probably got 40 years of combined experience on family immigration. So we'd love to talk it out with you. And if you need to hurry, or if you need thinking about doing it, you probably should hurry and do that consultation pretty soon. So, all right, have a great day.